And now I'd like to turn the mic over to our facilitator, an individual, an expert, a friend of mine that continues to show up mindfully for our community here around the world and very close proximity to the Cleveland area. Dr. Rush, thank you so much for joining us again today.
Thank you, Krista, and thank you all for having me today. It's very nice to see all of your faces. I hope that you're all getting some good weather where you are here in Cleveland. We're finally getting some actual breaks, and spring seems to be actually springing this week, which is awesome. It's nice and sunny outside my window today. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about mindfulness and how to use that for cultivating motivation and a sense of empowerment. Because I think so often in life, there are circumstances that make us feel out of control. I mean, all we have to do is turn on the TV and see all the things that are going on in the world that are outside of our control. But then having a chronic medical condition like Parkinson's can make one feel even more out of control. We know that there are changes to how you can physically function, changes to how you think in terms of memory and word finding, problem solving. There can be changes to social functioning and how well we can navigate situations. And when someone is feeling out of control, often it feels like you have less confidence, you have less mastery, and sometimes there's less motivation. And we kind of shift from this sense of internal control where I have control over my own body, I have control over my future and what life may bring, and to something that's more along the lines of I don't have as much control over myself as I think, or my future, or my goals. And that means that you might end up living in constant comparison of where you are versus where you want to be. And that can sometimes lead to disengagement from activities, from family, from friends, from things that used to matter or still do matter. And so in order to harness a sense of initiative or empowerment or motivation, we sometimes have to start thinking about it a little bit differently. And that can be a really difficult task. And often when I'm working with folks who have Parkinson's, they will approach me about how to handle struggles with motivation. So one thing I wanted to do briefly is just talk a little bit about what do we know about motivation? And there's actually been a lot of research looking at, what makes up motivation? How do we, increase motivation? How do we better understand what facilitates motivation? And, there's a line of research along something called self-determination theory. And according to this theory, there are three main factors that contribute to motivation. One is competence. And so that's a person's feeling of effectiveness in their own behavior. How competent are they in being able to do something? How good are they at doing it? Autonomy, which is how much is the thing that I'm doing a choice that I have versus something that's forced upon me? And then relatedness, which is how do we connect with others? How do they support and care for us? And how do we care for others? And how does that contribute to motivating forces for why we do things? And so, a brief example in this, I think about my older daughter. She started to read at a fairly young age. It was just something that came pretty naturally to her. So her competence for reading was fairly high for a young child. And so for her, it was reinforcing because she was good at reading. So the competence was high. She made the choice to read because she was good at it, because it was fun. And so she read because she wanted to, not necessarily because she was required to. And she got reinforcement from others from this. She got reinforcement from me, and I would buy her, the books that she wanted. We'd go to the library. She would get reinforcement from her teachers because they, loved that she was able to excel in this area. And so her motivation overall for reading was really high. So now we fast forward a few years later, and motivation has changed a little bit. work obviously has gotten harder as she's advanced through the years. Reading is not so much something that she does by choice, but she needs to do for a lot of her classes. And the intrinsic, that internal motivation that she had for reading is not quite there because she doesn't feel as competent as she used to, because all of her classmates can read and can read fairly well. And some of the stuff she's reading is much more challenging. It's not a choice anymore. She has to do it. And that sense of reinforcement and support that she's getting from her teachers and from me is less, hey, this is great, you're doing so well. And it's more like, hey, did you finish that chapter? And did you write this analysis? And did you do this report? And so the motivation has changed a bit. And so when there's that shift from this internal sense of motivation to an external motivation, sometimes it leads to less adaptive coping, higher risk of psychological distress, and even complications with physical illness. And so, for her coping became a little less adaptive because she felt that sense of pressure. So maybe she forgot about a book report, or she didn't do certain assignments. So she would kind of disengage as a way to cope with the pressure of needing to do some of the work. And so I often see this kind of scenario happen with some of the folks that I work with in Parkinson's. So one example is, exercise for some people used to be something they did because it was fun. They enjoyed doing it. But then with the advancement of some of their Parkinson's symptoms, those physical changes made some of those activities more difficult. And as I'm sure most of you know, you will hear from your medical providers and many other people who work with the field of Parkinson's that exercise is super important. It's something that you really need to do and want to do in order to maintain your health and to be able to possibly slow down some of the progression of symptoms. But for many people, once it becomes a have to instead of a get to, it's something I have to do, not something that you get to do. It's not a choice, it's an obligation. It ends up feeling like pressure, and it robs you of the joy of the intrinsic, that internal motivation, because it's more difficult. It might be more painful. It might be unpleasant. It might make you more aware of limitations that you may have physically. And so it can make the pressure to do it feel overwhelming. And then the should start to increase. Gosh, I should be able to exercise more. I should listen to my doctor's orders. I should, do the things that my friends are doing with exercise. But you find yourself kind of devoid of any meaningful prompt for motivation. So I see this not only with exercise and physical activity, but also people who really used to enjoy cooking or baking, or they enjoyed certain crafts, or they really enjoyed going to social gatherings, or hobbies like woodworking or yard work, or doing certain sports, or even doing certain things like housework. For some people, it was very intrinsically motivating to vacuum their floor because once you did it, it's clean. And so as some of their Parkinson's would progress, some of that intrinsic choice and joy would start to become less and less and less. So that's usually the point at which people come and see me. And we talk about, what do we do about that? How do we start to manage some of those lower motivation pieces? And so, we're actually going to do an exercise today that is meant to help you think about this. And some of what we're going to do is have you think about some of how you have felt in the past about things that have made you felt motivated or empowered or a sense of mastery. And what was it about those things that you enjoyed? And how can we possibly link that to some of what you do now? How can it serve your sense of autonomy, your sense of competence, your sense of connectedness? How can you, employ, or understand your values a little bit better as far as, what made those things fun to begin with that we can then tap into now, even if it may have to look different. And so just realizing that sometimes requires us to channel into that sense of acceptance of what is, right? That's a big piece of mindfulness, like, being able to accept what's in front of us, what the challenges are, but also what the strengths are of the situation and our own capacities. Being able to choose compassion for ourselves over criticism, as well as fostering, a topic we've talked about before, which is beginner's mind. How can we look at a task as if we've not done it before, or look at it in a novel way that can help us enjoy it in a way that perhaps we wouldn't have otherwise thought if we, only saw it with the blinders of past experience. So let's go ahead and dive right into our activity for today. So I want you to go ahead and get, comfortable in your chair, seat, couch, lazy boy, whatever you find yourself in today. And we're going to settle into this rested, seated position. And first connect to the sensation of breathing. Allowing our attention to settle on the breath. Just noticing the rhythm of your breathing as you inhale and exhale. Carving out space in this moment for mindfully reflecting on your experiences, your thoughts, and your emotions. Not attaching or being consumed by any of them, just being able to notice, being able to see the forest for the trees. So as you settle into this space, I want you to consider thinking about a time when you felt empowered, when you felt a sense of mastery and enjoyment with a task or an activity, a hobby. And for some, this may be recent. For some, this may have been long ago. Really envision what it was like to do that thing that brought you a sense of accomplishment or joy. Maybe tap into what feelings you notice when you think of this memory. What did it mean for you to be able to do this activity? What values that are core to you and your life did it tap into? Was it that it connected you to people that mattered? Is it that you accomplished something that helped yourself or the world at large? Is it that it was just purely fun without any pressure or obligation attached to it? So we're trying to discover what it is that you enjoyed about this activity and what motivated you to do it in the first place. Because by doing that, you can get a better idea of what it is that matters to you. And if you notice yourself judging or comparing that experience to where you are now, take a slightly deeper breath and anchor back to this moment, pulling away from any thoughts or entrenchment and judgment. Now, I want you to consider thinking more about current struggles you may have with certain tasks, certain activities, certain things that you feel that block of low motivation. And what emotions you might associate with that. Is it frustration, fear, sadness? And if nothing at all comes to mind, that's okay too. Just continue to focus on your breath and whatever other thoughts may arise, letting them pass by like leaves on a stream. But if you do have a situation in mind, ask yourself, when it comes to this motivation block, what is the goal of this activity? What about this activity is actually most important to me? Not what other people say is important, not what your loved ones say, your friends say, or your doctors say, but why is this important to me? And what is it that might be getting in the way of me doing this activity? Is it because physical stamina has decreased? Is it because I feel like I can't live up to my past potential? If something does need to look different, what might I be able to do differently? What maybe can I do instead? Maybe asking, if I did do this activity, how would I feel once it was completed? Would there be a feeling of joy or accomplishment or satisfaction then? Would it help if I connect with someone that could help me with it? Would it help if I did the same activity but for a shorter length of time? What's a way that I could possibly shift this activity from a have to a get to? How can this activity align with the values that matter? How can that potentially serve as motivation as you move forward? You notice any tension or frustration as you explore some of these things, that's okay. It's natural. It's allowing yourself to take a deep breath. Remember, it's a process. And lastly, asking yourself, what is my intention as I move forward? Is this particular activity or hobby or thing that I used to enjoy something that I want to try to make happen this week? And if so, what is it that I can tap into with these values or with connection or support that can help make it a reality? The more intentional we are about our actions and our choices, the more likely they'll be meaningful, the more likely we'll feel a sense of accomplishment, and that becomes self-reinforcing over time. Think about your intention, what choice you would like to make. And let's take one more deep breath here. And a slow and steady out breath. Allowing your shoulders to sink a little farther from your ears. Starting to shift in your seat a little bit. Stretching your arms, your legs, maybe wiggling those fingers and toes a little bit. Opening your eyes if they were closed. And coming back to our space in this room. Whenever you're ready. All right. Starting to see some eyes looking up. Okay. Now, as we come back to our space here, I would love to hear from you guys in terms of your reflections on this experience or questions that you might have. So feel free to write thoughts or questions in the chat for us to discuss in our last few minutes here. Looks like that there was one comment written. So someone had said, I was extremely efficient and effective at thinking, multitasking, completing tasks before Parkinson's. When you are excellent and start backing up the bell curve towards normal, my specialists don't see the issues I'm having, since to them, normal expectations for Parkinson's brain is below my current functionality, which is very frustrating to not have help at my level. And what can I do about that? Because it can gaslight my true functionality in ways that say I'm faking my abilities and functional norms. Oh, that's a tough one. And so I appreciate the participant for sharing this, because this is one that can be really hard, where people feel like they do have struggles with things in terms of their ability to function on day-to-day tasks, even though when they go into the office, things look quote unquote normal for where they may be on the curve for Parkinson's of, whatever their specialists say that they should, would be expected. And so, but for the person, it may look very different from their baseline and what they're used to expecting from themselves. And so there's this gap or disconnect between where their experiences in everyday life versus their provider saying, "Oh, you look great and everything looks like it's going well." And so I do think that can be incredibly frustrating for people, especially when they're used to functioning at a pretty high capacity. And so I would say, one, don't be afraid to speak up with your providers and let them know that even if I look, quote unquote, normal on the curve of where you'd expect me to be at this, stage of the game or with my other health issues or whatever else, I still am noticing these struggles or these difficulties with day-to-day tasks. And so the more you can, one, advocate for yourself and feel comfortable communicating that, even if there's not necessarily an answer that they have or something that they can do to, quote unquote, fix it, I think it's important for you to be able to name and describe that experience to your providers. Now, let's see here. So we've had a few people. Let's see. Someone had said, when I meditate, I get a spinning sensation. Any idea as to why? And so for some people, it helps if they anchor to a spot on the floor. So if one closes their eyes and they feel a sense of dizziness or unsteadiness, sometimes there could be many reasons. Some, it could be that you're just not used to it. Closing your eyes may give you a sense of disequilibrium. And so I have some patients who actually feel it's a much more comfortable experience if they just find a soft fixed point, maybe 4 or 6 feet in front of them on the floor, and they just kind of softly gaze at that particular area. And that just kind of helps them to focus their attention, and it helps their body stay in equilibrium a little bit better without needing to guess where it's at in relation to itself when the eyes are closed. So if your eyes are closed, I would suggest keeping them open and see if that helps. Okay. Let's see here. And I think someone had also said, I believe that having control is a fallacy. We can only control our response. And that's something that I agree with wholeheartedly, that, I think in life, we end up deluding ourselves into thinking we have a whole lot more control over our destiny, our actions, our future than we actually do. And so we can't necessarily control all the things that go on around us. The only thing that we can control is our response to them and what we choose to do with it. And so there's nothing like being diagnosed with a neurologic disorder like Parkinson's to really reinforce the idea that we don't always have as much control as we would like or what we think. And so to then be able to say, okay, so I have these things that are going on in my life or with my health. What is it that I can choose to do with that? Do I choose to take my medication? Do I choose to go to exercise classes? Do I choose to, learn more about Parkinson's, or do I choose to do something else? But how we respond to it certainly makes all the difference in how experiences tend to unfold. And so sometimes it can very much feel not like a choice. And but I think some of it depends on what it is that we focus on. But I do think we need to acknowledge that we definitely don't always have a choice in the things that occur within our lives. And then let's see, and someone had said, I no longer write for pleasure or for work or engage with people as much because it's hard for them to hear me and I can get frustrated. And so again, some of these things that people may have always used to enjoy or that were self-reinforcing because they were good at it or it came easily, end up sometimes being a source of frustration or a source of, reminder of the things that are more difficult now. And so, that's where I encourage people to maybe use a meditation exercise like we just did to say, okay, if I'm meeting up against this brick wall, how do I examine the wall? Is there a way over the wall, around the wall, under the wall, through the wall? And how can I, maybe sometimes, just take a different path where I don't engage with the wall? Because sometimes it's a matter of doing things differently or doing things, with other people that may support us better, or doing things that still serve the same value. So it may be that writing for someone is a way for them to express themselves and they really enjoy it for that purpose. But maybe now they could do something else. I've had other patients where they've shifted from writing to painting, and it's not necessarily good. It's not something that they're going to hang up in a museum anywhere, but it's something that they do because it's a way of self-expression. It's a way to get things channeled through a creative outlet. And so it's a way for people to still be able to hit that core value, even if it has to look different than it used to. Okay, so we are 5 minutes over, and I certainly want to be mindful of your time. So thank you guys so much for being so engaged and joining us today. And I'll let Krista close us out with any final words.
Thank you, Dr. Rush. Always so grateful for your guidance, your facilitation, and words of wisdom. We don't get enough time with you. So thank you for sharing your valuable time with us here on the Mindfulness Mondays. We'll see you all again next week. April 17th is when we'll join live again. So be well, be mindful, and continue to indulge in the things that bring you joy. Until then, we'll see you next time.